Iran has been in the news a lot lately, whether as a sponsor of terrorism abroad, its antagonism with the West, or the ongoing repression of its long-suffering people. With President Trump stepping up the pressure on the regime in Tehran, talk has turned to what a future Iran could look like. Joining me now is Crown Prince Rضاپهلوی, son of the late Shah of Iran, to tell me what he wants to see President Trump do to help his country, and why he sees the Iranian people as America's greatest friends in the Middle East. Now, you said recently that the Iranian regime is the weakest that it has ever been in its history. What made you say that?
One of the reasons they have always tried to maintain an apparatus of repression and create fear is a sign of instability and concern about their own survival, and diverting and deflecting attention from events at home to issues to distract people. And that behavior is indicative of the fact that after so many years of complete negligence of the country, mismanagement, corruption, and basically plundering the wealth of a nation not to the benefit of their citizens but abroad, has created more and more weakness in terms of performance and the expectation that people have, but also the fact that it simply is incapable of addressing the true needs of our citizens, which is why the Iranian people are trying to send this clear message to the outside world that if you want a true partner in peace, it is us who represent the alternative, not this regime, which has taken our country hostage in the first place 46 years ago and continues to do that.
And in some recent protests, and this isn't the first time it's happened, there were protesters in the crowd who were chanting your name and saying, where is the Crown Prince? After so many decades away from Iran, how does it feel to know that you're still such an important figurehead for so many in Iran?
Iran, had it not been for this revolution, would have been at least equivalent of a South Korea in the Middle East. Instead, we have become North Korea. And, I think a lot of the world has been, at the beginning, looking at, well, what happened? Is that a phenomenon? Are we talking about a clash of cultures or civilizations? I think it's really a matter of clash of values. This is a regime that celebrates martyrdom as opposed to life. We talk about human rights and freedoms and equality and putting an end to any form of discrimination. This is a message that resonates with today's Gen Z. And one of the reasons my message has been resonating is because this is really an appeal to the true aspiration of a nation that has been denied those opportunities.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, you've called recently for sort of increased U.S. support to help overthrow the regime in Tehran. What does that look like to you, that increased support?
When you look at modern history, let's say the last 50 years, and many critical and fundamental changes that has occurred. Example, the end of the Soviet Union. Example, an end of apartheid in South Africa. Or the success in many countries that were stuck behind the Iron Curtain. None of this has happened without some tacit element of support from free societies and democracies in the outside world. Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher played a critical role that brought an end to the Soviet Union. So the expectation of my fellow compatriots from the outside free world in particular was, well, we aspire to the very same values that you enjoy, whether it's in England or in France or in Canada or in the United States. And we as Iranians aspire to the very same ideals, as opposed to a regime that is the obstacle between us and the free world. A warmongering regime that has been the basic root cause of regional instability and exporting radicalism and terrorism is not the answer to our mutual questions. And Iranians, in fact, are calling it very straight. When they are on the streets, for instance, in the case of America, they've been chanting slogans that they lie to us that the enemy is America. Our enemy is right here. These are slogans that Iranians chant on the streets. And that message is meant for governments like the one in the United States and Western Europe of saying, look, we are imprisoned here. Why don't you look at us, the Iranian people, as your true partners and an alternative to this regime? And I still believe that the best way to put an end to all the crises that has been pretty much as a result of this regime's existence and behavior, whether it's terrorism, the nuclear threat, radicalization, so on and so forth, you can in one step eliminate all of these threats, as opposed to have a scenario of status quo and diplomatic attempts of negotiating them or pressuring them with a false expectation of behavior change. I've been arguing this for decades now. I said, listen, this regime in its DNA is simply incompatible with the free world as we know it. Expecting them to change their behavior is a waste of time. And my proposition in terms of what can happen and needs to happen is, and we've seen to some extent some level of success, let's say under the first administration of President Trump, that maximum pressure did pay some dividends. It isolated the regime more. It curtailed their means to be able to finance and fuel their war machine. Unfortunately, that was reversed under the Biden administration, where over $200 billion worth of oil sale that Iran should not have, the regime should not have had access to, only helped them to further expand their and support their proxies, whether it's the Houthis or it is Hezbollah or Hamas. And this is not a coincidence that as a result of that, the regime felt invigorated and continued that path. So the only way to put an end to this is to say, okay, maximum pressure needs to be maintained.
In your view, what does the West have to do to prevent more examples of this kind of exported terror and disorder that the regime in Tehran can bring?
You know, I guess allegorically I could say that every time a fire has been lit, you have dispatched your fire trucks to put out a fire here and there. The problem is that nobody has gone after the arsonists in the first place. Somebody is the root cause of lighting these fires. Now, if you look at the tentacles of this octopus, it's been all over the place, but the eye is in Tehran. Now, a lot of people sort of fringe upon the concept of, oh, we're talking about regime change again. Look at the fiasco of what happened in Afghanistan post 9/11 or what happened in Iraq 9/11. To which I say, first of all, the scenario of change in Iran doesn't resemble any of those scenarios, which, by the way, were terribly mishandled, which gave regime change a bad name. But it's not wrong in concept.
Well, what does a post-Mullah relationship between President Trump and a free Iran look like, in your view?
Well, you know, this regime has been calling death to America and death to Israel from its inception. It's not just a slogan. It's actually their ideology. Their venomous attitude towards the free world is a necessity for their survival. The Iranian people, on the other hand, let's not forget one thing. When 9/11 happened, the only country in the Middle East where on the streets of the major cities, instead of celebrating the attack, had candlelight vigils in support and in sympathy to the victims of 9/11 was Iran and Iran alone. That's something that I think many Americans should realize, that the Iranian people have no animosity towards America. President Trump, in his first term, and his policies of maximum pressure made him one of the most popular leaders, or perhaps the most popular American president since the revolution. Why? Because the Iranians felt that this is something that weakens the regime, which is in their advantage.
We've talked a lot about the potentials of a free Iran, but I mean, what are the risks if nothing is done to deal with the regime, not just in Iran, but in Israel, with regards to the Houthis in Yemen, and also in other neighboring countries such as Afghanistan and Pakistan?
There's this rationale that says, well, option one is diplomacy. But if option one doesn't work, then option B is striking their facilities or dismantling them. What happened to let's get the Iranian people a chance to remedy the problem before you have to resort to those measures if you cannot achieve a diplomatic outcome? That has been the missing element. The Generation Z of Iran today, the Mahsa Aminis of Iran, are in line with the Western values, not a warmongering regime that wants to create martyrs out of them, only to survive itself while their children are starving on the streets. That's the big difference. And to not give those people a chance in your calculation means that, well, once again, you have to go from one extreme to the other. And I think that option is still there. We believe that we shall succeed as a nation. But let's say worst case scenario, we failed at liberating ourselves. You still have those options on the table. But going directly from that to option B without giving that process a chance, I don't think it makes any logical sense.